You check the time. You have exactly 43 minutes before you need to leave. You know this. You've calculated it. You've done this 1,000 times before, and yet something happens in those 43 minutes. Something you can't quite name. You find yourself doing one more thing, checking one more email, starting a task you know won't be finished. And suddenly, you're moving through your space with a kind of frantic urgency that feels both familiar and humiliating. You're late. Again. And here's what nobody tells you about chronic lateness. It's not about time management. It's never been about time management. You've read the articles. You've set the alarms. You've tried leaving your keys by the door, laying out your clothes the night before, setting your clocks 15 minutes fast, as if you could trick yourself into punctuality. But none of it works. Because the real issue isn't that you can't read a clock. The real issue is that somewhere deep in your nervous system, being on time feels like surrender. This is the paradox at the heart of chronic lateness. The thing that makes you feel free is the exact thing that's trapping you in a cycle of shame, broken trust, and social isolation. You're not late because you're careless. You're late because, on some unconscious level, you're protecting something you believe is essential to your survival, your autonomy, your sense of self-determination, your refusal to be controlled. And the cruel irony? In your attempt to resist being controlled by time, by schedules, by other people's expectations, you've become completely controlled by your own pattern. You've traded one cage for another.
Let's name what's actually happening here. What we call chronic lateness is often a manifestation of what psychologists call time perception distortion, but more specifically, it's frequently rooted in what's known as oppositional autonomy, an unconscious resistance to external authority that develops when a person's sense of agency was threatened, minimized, or controlled during their developmental years. Think of it this way. Your relationship with time is a direct mirror of your relationship with authority. And if you grew up in an environment where your autonomy was constantly compromised, where you had to comply, perform, meet others' expectations at the cost of your own needs, then lateness becomes a form of protest. It's your nervous system's way of saying, you don't get to tell me when to show up. You don't get to dictate my rhythm. I still have some control here. This connects deeply to what's called passive resistance, a psychological defense mechanism where compliance is refused, not through direct confrontation, but through subtle, often unconscious acts of defiance. Lateness is the perfect passive resistance. It's rebellion that can be blamed on poor time management. It's control that masquerades as chaos. But here's where it gets neurologically complex. When you experience chronic stress related to control, particularly in childhood, your brain's prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function, time perception, and planning, actually develops differently. Studies show that individuals who experienced environments of high control or unpredictability often struggle with what's called temporal discounting, the inability to accurately perceive how much time has passed or how much time a task will require. Your brain literally learned to exist in a state of present moment focus as a survival mechanism. When the future felt threatening, or when planning ahead meant complying with someone else's agenda, your nervous system learned to live in the now, not as a spiritual practice, but as a defense. And there's something else happening here, something even more subtle. Time anxiety. For many chronically late people, the act of being early or even on time triggers a specific kind of existential discomfort. Waiting feels intolerable. Arriving early means sitting with yourself, with nothing to do, in a state of anticipatory vigilance that feels unbearable. So you unconsciously engineer situations where you arrive in a state of crisis. Because crisis is familiar. Crisis means you don't have to feel the vulnerability of stillness.
But let's talk about what this pattern actually costs you. Because this isn't just about inconveniencing others, this is about the profound, accumulated grief of being perpetually misunderstood. You know what people think of you: disrespectful, selfish, careless, inconsiderate. And the worst part is, you can't explain it. You can't tell them that you're not late because you don't care. You're late because you care too much about preserving the last shred of autonomy you feel you have. You can't tell them that being on time feels like erasing yourself, that it feels like submission to a structure that once hurt you. So you carry the weight of their judgment. You apologize constantly, you promise to do better, and you hate yourself a little more each time you're late again, because some part of you knows you're not even doing this on purpose. This is what philosopher Simone de Beauvoir called the tragedy of bad faith, the state of living in contradiction with yourself, of being unable to align your actions with your conscious intentions because unconscious forces are running the show. You want to be reliable. You genuinely want to be someone people can count on. But there is a part of you, a protective part, that won't let you. And here's the invisible grief. You've sacrificed trust, the foundation of every meaningful relationship, on the altar of an autonomy that doesn't actually make you free. You've traded deep connection for the illusion of control, because every time you're late, you reinforce a barrier between yourself and intimacy. People stop relying on you. They stop inviting you. They stop believing in your word. And then you're alone, which confirms the deepest fear that drove the pattern in the first place, that if people really saw you, if they really knew you, they reject you anyway. The people in your life don't understand that your lateness is often laced with anxiety and shame. They don't see you pacing in your apartment, cursing yourself, promising this time will be different. They just see someone who doesn't respect their time. And that gap between your internal experience and their perception becomes an unbridgeable chasm. You're living in what psychologist Carl Rogers might call incongruence, the painful split between your authentic self and the self you present to the world. And that split is exhausting. It's a specific kind of loneliness, being surrounded by people who fundamentally misunderstand the nature of your struggle. So, what does this look like in adult life? How does this pattern of unconscious rebellion against time and authority actually manifest across the domains of your existence? You might find that you sabotage professional opportunities, not consciously, but consistently. You're late to interviews, you miss deadlines by just enough to create concern, but not enough to be fired. You're brilliant at your work, but your lateness creates a reputation that overshadows your competence. Colleagues stop trusting you with time-sensitive projects. Promotions go to people who are less talented but more punctual. And you tell yourself you don't care about corporate structures anyway, but deep down, you do care. You care about being valued. You just can't seem to get there on time. You might notice that your relationships have a specific pattern. You attract partners who are either extremely rigid about time, giving you something to push against, or completely chaotic themselves, validating your pattern. Healthy, secure people often lose patience with you. They interpret your lateness as disrespect, and they're not entirely wrong, except that you're not disrespecting them. You're unconsciously battling a ghost from your past. You're fighting for autonomy against a parent or authority figure who no longer has power over you,
but your nervous system hasn't gotten the message. You might experience a phenomenon where you're on time for things that feel like your choice, but chronically late for obligations. You're never late to a concert you want to attend. You're never late when you're meeting a friend who has no expectations of you. But doctor's appointments, work meetings, family gatherings with embedded obligations, suddenly you're 15, 20, 30 minutes late. This isn't random. This is your nervous system distinguishing between chosen and imposed time commitments. You might find yourself living in a constant state of low-grade crisis. Because when you're always running late, you're always in fight or flight mode. Your body is flooded with stress hormones. Your relationships exist in a state of perpetual apology and repair. You never get to just be. You're always recovering from the last late arrival or anxiously anticipating the next one. This is what trauma therapists call hypervigilance, but in your case, you're hypervigilant about time while simultaneously unable to manage it effectively. You might notice that you have a complicated relationship with rest. Being early means waiting. Waiting means stillness. Stillness means being alone with your thoughts, with your anxiety, with the parts of yourself you've been running from. So you engineer situations where there's always urgency, always movement, always a reason not to sit with yourself. Your lateness is actually a sophisticated avoidance mechanism disguised as poor planning. You might find that you overfunction in other areas to compensate. You're generous, creative, emotionally available, deeply thoughtful. You bring gifts, you remember details, you show love in 1,000 ways that don't involve being on time, because you're trying to prove your worth through other means. You're trying to say, I know I'm late, but I'm still valuable. I'm still lovable. Please don't reject me for this one flaw. And finally, you might experience a specific kind of shame spiral. After each late arrival, you promise yourself it won't happen again. You create elaborate systems, you set multiple alarms, you try to leave earlier, and then you watch yourself, as if from outside your own body, do the exact same thing again. This isn't a lack of willpower. This is an unconscious protective pattern that's been hardwired into your nervous system. And until you address the root, the need for autonomy, the resistance to control, the unresolved relationship with authority, no amount of time management strategies will work. These aren't character flaws. These are coping strategies that once served you. They're adaptive behaviors that helped a version of you survive an environment that felt threatening to your autonomy. But now they're outdated software running on new hardware, creating problems in a life that no longer needs this particular kind of protection.
So how do you begin to unravel this? How do you heal a pattern that's been protecting you for so long? First, you have to do something that might feel counterintuitive. You have to stop gaslighting yourself. Stop telling yourself you're just bad with time. Stop accepting the narrative that you're selfish or disrespectful. Those stories keep you stuck. Instead, get curious. Ask yourself, what am I protecting by being late? What does being on time represent that feels threatening? This is the work of what psychologists call mentalization, the ability to understand your own behavior as meaningful rather than random. Your lateness is meaningful. It's communicating something. Listen to it. Next, practice what's called reparenting your relationship with time. This means creating new, compassionate associations with punctuality. Instead of framing being on time as submission or loss of control, reframe it as a gift you give yourself, the gift of peace, the gift of not living in constant crisis, the gift of showing up for your own life the way you wish someone had shown up for you when you were young. Engage in what trauma therapists call somatic tracking. Notice what happens in your body when you think about being on time. Where do you feel resistance? Tightness in your chest, a flutter of anxiety, a surge of defiance. These physical sensations are your nervous system's memory of old threats. By noticing them without judgment, you begin to create space between the old pattern and your current response. Consider whether your current life actually requires the level of autonomy protection your nervous system thinks it needs. Are you still in a controlling environment, or have you gained freedom, but your body hasn't caught up? This discernment is crucial. Sometimes our protective patterns outlive the threats that created them. And here's the most important piece. Being on time is not about becoming compliant or losing yourself. It's about choosing reliability as an act of self-respect and relational integrity. It's about recognizing that true autonomy includes the freedom to show up, to be trustworthy, to maintain connections with people you love without the barrier of chronic disappointment. As James Hollis writes, the task of the second half of life is to recover the unlived life. Your lateness is part of an unlived life. The life where you trust yourself, where you trust time, where you trust that being present doesn't mean being controlled. Healing chronic lateness isn't about becoming obsessively punctual. It's not about transforming into someone who arrives 30 minutes early to everything. It's about giving yourself the freedom to choose, to show up when you say you will because that's the person you want to be, not because someone is forcing you. It's about understanding that the greatest rebellion isn't against the clock. The greatest rebellion is against the parts of your past that told you that compliance meant erasure. The greatest freedom is discovering that you can be both autonomous and reliable, that you can preserve your sense of self and honor your commitments. You were never the problem. You were just solving the wrong equation. Now you know what the real question is. And that changes everything.